We will have now the first conference, the opening conference by Mr. Desmond Kuek. Mr. Desmond Kuek is a president and a group CEO of SMRT Corporation. SMRT Corporation is Singapore's premier multimodal land transport provider with core businesses in rail operations, maintenance, and engineering, as well as in bus, taxis, and automotive services. Complementing these are integrated business in retail, media, and marketing, as well as property and retail management. But we have to note that prior to joining SMRT, Mr. Kuek served in the Singapore Armed Force from 1982 to 2010, rising steadily through the ranks to the pinnacle leadership positions of Director of Joint Intelligence, Chief of Army, and Chief of Defense Force. From 2010 to 2012, Mr. Kuek held the appointment of Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources. He has also previously served on the boards of Singapore Technologies, Engineering and its subsidiaries, Defense Science and Technology Agency, Housing and Development Board, Jurongton Corporation, and International Enterprise Singapore. Mr. Kuek holds a Bachelor of Arts Honour and Master of Arts Engineering Science from Oxford University and a Master in Public Administration from Harvard University. He is also currently a member of the Civil Service College Board and chairs its Audit Committee. Mr. Kuek is a member of International Advisory Panel of the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative City at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. He is on the Advisory Committee for the College of Engineering at Nanyang Technological University and also on the Asia Pacific Japan Advisory Board for SAP. I know that was not very easy for Mr. Kuek to find a free space in this very completely full and tight agenda, but it's a very great honor because he decided to come to open the conference. So please, a very warm welcome to Mr. Desmond Kuek.
Bonjour. Let me just try one line in French. Il me fait plaisir d'être ici avec vous. Unfortunately, that's the limit of my French. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you at the opening of your Imagination Week. I thought at length about your very intriguing theme for the week, work to live, live to work, and not being able to imagine, if you like, what it is that you have had in terms of your own experiences. I thought I would share with you my own work and life experiences in a career that has spanned over 30 years, the privilege of leadership at the top across the military service, the public sector, and now the corporate world. And I thought I would just take half the time to speak and hopefully spend the other half of the time in possibly a dialogue with you on anything at all that you would like to engage me on that might interest you. How do you imagine work and life ahead of you? You all have a future before you that is filled with immense and exciting opportunities. It's easy to be bewildered by the massive array of ideas, and it is often very convenient to simply follow in the road that is already well traveled and tested by others before you. But life, I would say, isn't just about making a living. It is about making a difference. That difference is founded on the way that we work and live, and in our individual and collective leadership and service of the community and the people around us. At the age of 18, I joined the Singapore Army and won a scholarship to study at Oxford University. At the time, I would not have known that I would one day go on to lead Singapore's armed forces many years later as its chief. What I do know today is that what you are and what you become is a function of the seemingly small, everyday actions, decisions, and choices you make as you step your way through life. I followed my heart and found deep meaning in leading our soldiers in Singapore, our sailors, our airmen and women, in the collective mission of defending Singapore's national security and well-being. It wasn't just a job. It was an amazing journey of opportunity and adventure. I moved through as many as 16 different appointments in 28 years, sometimes holding 2 at a time. In that climb up to the top of the military hierarchy and ranks, I had the privilege of commanding tens of thousands of people in major army formations. I organized the biggest National Day Independence celebration in Singapore over the millennium. I conducted our largest humanitarian relief mission after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians in Aceh in Sumatra. I worked urgently with intelligence chiefs around the world because I was then the director of joint intelligence in the military at the time that the specter of transnational terrorism following the World Trade Center attacks in the United States in 2001 reared its ugly head. And I led the sweeping transformation, if you like, of the Singapore Armed Forces to today's modern network-enabled force. Work in the military often meant braving physical discomfort and inconvenience out in the rain, in the sun, in the cold, in the dark, sometimes facing with risk to life, even though precautions and protection have been taken. Operational deployments brought me to troubled spots across the world, like Timor-Leste, Kashmir, Kuwait and Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Gulf of Aden. In many ways, I would say that my life was colored by my work. I celebrated my 19th birthday on patrol training in the tropical jungles in Brunei. By the time I was 21, probably about your kind of age, I had traversed 7 time zones through Siberia and Mongolia. At 28, I was exploring the Masai Mara in Kenya on a safari with British Army officers. I met with people from all walks, had the opportunity to lunch in regal style with Queen Elizabeth II. I partnered the Sultan of Brunei for pistol shooting, and I learned a thing or two about life from the perspective of my 20-year-old tank driver, who at the time that he was 20 years old was already a father of 2, and from another trooper who had spent time in remand for gang fighting. My career in the military culminated with 4 years as the Chief of Army, another 3 years as the Chief of Defence Force, before I retired from active military service, and I then joined the civil service to head a government ministry in environment and water resources as its permanent secretary. It was then a very challenging period to join the ministry as, for the first time in many years, torrential showers had caused Orchard Road, and I don't know how many of you have had the chance to visit Orchard Road. It caused Orchard Road to flood. Obviously, this had to be urgently resolved, because Orchard Road, as you may know, is to Singapore what the Champs-Élysées is to Paris. And you can't imagine, of course, the Champs-Élysées flooding in high tourist season. It was a time as well when we were also reinventing the utility of drains and canals to turn them into active, beautiful waterways that can be used by the community to enjoy as common public spaces. And Marina Bay, if you have a chance to take a look at this, was at the time the most prominent example of how a river or a stream with urban water flowing into it can be turned into a lifestyle destination for Singaporeans and for tourists. I enjoyed especially the value of the work involved in promoting and enabling a cleaner, more sustainable environment that would make for a more livable home for all of us now and for future generations. And for many of you who have been following the climate change talks in Paris, you will know that that is very much the kind of work that the Ministry for the Environment and Water Resources gets involved in. Well, 3 years ago, I decided to move on out of the government to try new leadership challenges in the private sector, in the corporate world. At the time, my friends thought I was either very brave or just plain crazy, especially when they found out that I had agreed to take up the job as Chief Executive of SMRT Corporation. SMRT, maybe you would be more familiar if I said it's something like an RATP in France. In Singapore, it is arguably the hottest seat in town because the aging rail network in Singapore was experiencing, at the time, 3 years ago, frequent disruptions. And the commuting public was not at all amused with deteriorating reliability, with increasing congestion faced in train services. Actually, I think this happens everywhere in the world. Everybody complains about public transport. But SMRT in Singapore carries 1 billion passengers in a year, passenger journeys in a year. So you can imagine that anything that happens with the company draws strong public interest and reaction. 3 weeks after I joined the company, a power fault caused the entire Circle Line in Singapore to come to a halt. And my very first media appearance was to apologize for the breakdown that had been caused by deficiencies during its construction. A month after I took over the job, in an unexpected downturn in labor relations, a number of our Chinese bus drivers went on an illegal strike because they were unhappy with their living and working conditions. Strikes may be commonplace in many other countries, but it was the first time in 26 years in Singapore. It made, of course, international news. As a public listed company on the Singapore Stock Exchange, providing an essential public transport service, you can imagine that many in Singapore continue to query the viability and ability of SMRT to balance across the diverse and sometimes, if you like, conflicted interests of commuters on the one hand, shareholders on the other hand, and regulators, and also our own employees, all of whom have their own interests. I describe these in a very quick backdrop of my own life and work experiences, not because I want to talk to you about work, but it is, of course, not my intention to do so this afternoon, to speak about these challenges, because every job, every task you will take on will have its own share of crises and opportunities. More important is how you will lead your work and life, how you will lead your teams of people to overcome any adversity and to make your mark. You make the vital difference through the quality of your leadership. So whether it is for me in the military or for you in the public or private sectors, and through the course of the 30 or more years that I've had the privilege of serving in all of these different domains, I've decided to pick out 10 points that I would like very quickly to share with you, gleaned from my own work and life experience, which I hope that you will find beneficial. The first, if you like, is to believe in what you do. You must lead with passion and conviction. Ask yourself what you believe in, what you stand for, and what motivates and fires you up. You cannot inspire anyone if you yourself are not inspired. then you must use that passion to infect others around you so that every opportunity is used to influence more positively, more powerfully the lives of those whom you lead. Believe in what you do and why you do it. Don't just simply go through the motion, as they say. When others see that you believe in what you do, they will be more inspired and more likely to share in your commitment, your dedication, and your passion. Number 2, set your goals high. You must lead with vision and high standards of excellence. This makes the real difference between being mediocre and being outstanding. Resist the temptation to look for the easiest way or the minimum that you can get away with. You will not have stretched yourself, and you will have nothing to feel proud of at the end of the day. Your team members may initially like the idea that you are easy with your standards or with discipline, but they will certainly not respect you for it. What they want is a leader with a vision, forging a collective goal that they can take direction from and they can set their sights on. As they say, you can't score if you don't have a goal. Simple goals will do, but set them with high standards. If there is something worth doing, I would urge that it is worth doing well and to the best of your ability. Always search, always strive for greater excellence, always reach up for the stars. When you reach for the stars, even if you don't finally get the stars, you won't have mud in your hands. 3, know your job well. You must lead with professionalism and competence. To be a leader, your team will expect you to be technically and professionally competent. Know your job and theirs too, well enough to be able to tell them what to do and how to do it, and be good enough yourself to even show them how. Believe in yourself because you have been schooled and you have been trained well. You must, however, now continue to learn well and hone and improve on your skills so that you can be excellent in whatever field that you have chosen. Be confident that you have what it takes to do your job well, and be willing and quick to learn in the areas that you may not yet know so well. When I was in the military, there was a saying that commanders would give to their soldiers, which is to follow me and do as I do. That's a much more powerful way to inspire your people than simply do as I say. But you can only say that. You can only do so with confidence, and you can only lead by that example personally if you first know your job well. 4th, learn from others. And that seems like a rather simple, trite thing to say, but you must lead. In your leadership, in whatever role you perform in future, you must lead with humility. Even as you show confidence, as I said in the last point, you must also be humble, ready, and willing to learn from others. At one point or another, you will find yourself inexperienced in the face of more experienced, more knowledgeable officers and specialists in whatever field of work that you are in. Take the opportunity to learn from them with a humble heart and with an earnest mind. Nurture that discipline of thinking and learning. There is nothing to be embarrassed about not knowing. But there is something to be embarrassed about not asking. And there is everything to be embarrassed about not learning. In every situation, there is something to learn if you have the humility to want to learn it. If you show interest, humility, and an open mind, those more experienced than you will be more forthcoming with their advice and their support. And those below you will be more patient and trusting of your leadership. 5, make things happen. You must lead with decision and action. Your team members, your followers, will expect you to make things happen and not just wait for things to happen or for someone else to take that initiative, or worse, as a leader, not even know what happened. The first is the mark of a leader, the second, a follower, and the third, unfortunately, a loser. Make things happen. And make sure these things that happen are the right things to the best of your judgment. Those whom you lead expect that you make decisions and take actions wisely and in a sound and timely manner, because they are likely and often the most affected by the consequences if you do not. Many times, not making a decision is in itself the wrong decision, and no action is in itself the wrong action. So be proactive, take the initiative, and make the right things happen for yourself and for everyone in your team. Number 6, I would say, take responsibility when you are wrong. Lead with courage and with integrity. It's very easy to stand tall and take the credit whenever your team has done well, or when there is praise and compliments that's going round. It is not so easy to stand up to take the rap when things don't go so well. Resist the urge to pass the buck to someone else or to blame your subordinates. There will indeed be many times when things go wrong. Your people will expect that you will have the integrity and the courage to take responsibility for your actions and your decisions when you are wrong. And even when sometimes you may not be the one that is wrong, but happen to be the team leader. Everybody makes mistakes, especially when you are doing something for the first time. Refrain from pushing the blame down the line. Quietly instead accept responsibility as the leader and learn from that mistake. I have found in my own time that making the mistake is not the issue. In fact, my own experience says that your maturity, your integrity will earn you greater respect than your wrongdoing had gained you criticism. 7, keep going even when the going gets tough. You must lead with determination. It's not enough to set a goal or have an action plan, as I said earlier, if you cannot last the distance. If you have ever done a navigation exercise, you will know that to get to the end point, to get to your objective, you must first set the direction with your compass. And then you must pace out the distance until you get there, regardless whether there is a thorn bush, or there is a hill, or there is a river, or there is a swamp that is in your way. Over, under, around the obstacle, nothing stands in your way. To overcome and accomplish your goal will require physical fitness. It will also require mental toughness. Your team members, your followers will expect you to have the stamina, discipline, and determination to go on, because they will give up if you do. As a leader, you must keep going, even when, and especially when, the going gets tough. Number 8, care for your people. You must lead with your heart, not just with your head. Nobody cares how much you know, as they say, until they know how much you care. Even as you push for high standards of excellence, your followers will expect you to know them well. Understand their strengths and their limitations. Recognize when they put in the extra effort, and look out for their well-being. Well-being, I must say, is not the same as welfare, which is no doubt also important. But welfare doesn't always lead to well-being in the long run. Ensuring high performance standards is important, and this must be balanced with care for for your people, for your followers. This is even more pertinent when your followers are entrusting their lives or their livelihood in your hands. Your care must be genuine and it must be selfless, because your followers can easily see through you if you are insincere. No extent of lessons, case studies on leadership and management, no amount of discussion on vision, mission, core values can ever be good enough to make you a good leader if you do not feel passionately for the people who work for you and about the people for whom you work for. So take the time, take the trouble to find out what concerns your followers in the team and what their concerns, their fears, their motivations, and their aspirations might be. Show them that you do care. Number 9 is to keep your communication lines open. You must lead through mutual trust and understanding. You mustn't assume that your people, your followers, do not or will not understand what is happening. Keep them informed about the reasons for your actions and decisions. Communicate. The morale in a team is low when the members have no clue what is going on. It is lower still if they have reason to believe that their leader is not telling them what or why. And it is lowest when they know that their leader will not listen. Only if you keep your lines open can you build trust and confidence. So tell your followers why whenever you have the time to explain, so that they will trust you and not need to question why when you clearly do not have the time to explain, such as when in the heat of a crisis, in business or otherwise. Keep those lines of communication open so that you know what is going on in their hearts and in their minds, and so that they in turn also know what is going on in yours. And finally, number 10 is to build a strong team. You must lead through teamwork. One of your key priorities as a leader must be to get the people in your team to work together. When you can build a strong team, people will find ways to work together and want to do more, rather than fight with each other over whom should do less. Your followers want you to make them work together as a team, to build them up and forge them together. They want you to help them gain confidence in you and also in themselves and the others around them. This sense of cohesion and bonding, esprit de corps, and spirit of not wanting to let the team down is a basic need for all human beings, and is the kind of team spirit that will help win over any difficulty or adversity. So I've covered 10 points. They are not rocket science. In many ways, I think you would probably identify with many of them. And you may have your own, you may have others that you will add to this list. But my list is a list that is drawn from all the years that I've had, whether in the military, in the public sector, or now in the corporate world. Human beings have the same motivations, have the same aspirations, have the same needs. And whatever it is, these 10 points I have found to be pertinent, relevant, and most applicable regardless of the domain or field of work that I have been in. I started by saying that life isn't just about making a living. It's not about high-paying jobs and glamorous careers. Of course, that is what everybody aspires to. But it's really about finding yourself and making a difference through your leadership and your service in your work to the betterment of the community and the lives of the people around you, through the leadership model, example, and attributes that you manifest. Leading and serving are actually two sides of the same coin. Leading well does not come automatically. It certainly is not just because you hold a high job title or a senior rank. It doesn't come because you're armed with a prestigious academic degree, like the one you have from ESSEC, for example. But a leader is what you must be if you are to make a difference. And you surely want to be the best that you can be in this. For finding your gift is life's meaning. Giving it away through your leadership and your service in making that difference is life's purpose. I wish you all the very best leading in your work and in your life. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. That was already an inspirational speech. I guess we can have questions. Yes. We can have questions. I'm just saying because we don't have moderation, so I'm afraid.
Sure,
some
no.
of the questions you want to ask, don't hesitate.
Do I get to see? Do I get to see?
You can see that
yeah, okay.
over there.
Okay. Thank you.
And of course, if some of you want to ask directly to Mr. Kuek questions, I can give you the microphone.
Okay. So what do I do? I answer the questions that's here. I pick the questions I want to answer.
Yeah.
All right. And if any of you would like to interrupt and ask a question verbally, I'd be happy to answer them as well. Well, let me take the first one. Defense threats, high stakes for the Singapore Army. You know, when Singapore first gained independence, and I think this is a history in international politics and diplomacy, we were kicked out of what was then the Malaysian Federation for a couple of years. Well, let me take you back. Singapore has, for the longest time, been under British colonial rule. Up until the Japanese occupied Singapore in World War II. And after that, of course, the Japanese lost the war in 1945, and the British came back in to govern Singapore until the late 1950s and early 60s, where Singapore pushed for independence. In 1963, Singapore became, a part of the Malayan Federation, joining up as one of the parts of what makes up today's Malaysia, which is East and West Malaysia. In 1965, because of differences over policy and the idea of how it is a nation should be governed, because Singapore believed in meritocracy and equal rights for all regardless of race, language, religion, whereas Malaysia still today manifests a policy of Malay supremacy. They found the Malaysian ruler, the King of Malaysia in 1965, decided that Singapore was too much of a political problem to the rest of Malaysia, and so Singapore was booted out of the Malayan Federation and became its own independent nation despite all odds that it was facing at that point in time. In 1965, Singapore had no water, it had no land, it's a small island, it was mostly swampland, it was a fishing village in its own history, it was useful as a trading port because it has a deep water harbor, and it had no military to defend itself because in the late 60s, the British armed forces decided that it would pull out its forces east of Suez. And as a result, the Singapore government then had to very quickly develop its own armed forces, and with the help of the Israelis, if you like, and a number of people a number of advisors from Germany, from Taiwan, from Israel, it reached out and it rapidly built up its armed forces, its military, to deal with the defense of the nation. So what kind of threats, the question asks, does the Singapore nation in its fledgling state contend with. Obviously, it had to deal with the fact that it was thrust into independence, not because the Malaysian rulers then thought that Singapore would succeed. It was thrust into independence because the Malay rulers then wanted to teach the Singapore rulers a lesson that it could not survive on its own. So it was for a very different reason that Singapore was thrust into independence. Of course, today, history, looking back over the past 50 years in Singapore, has celebrated its 50th year. Last year has become what people talk about as an economic miracle. That economic miracle, that ability to punch above its weight as one of the smallest city-states in the world, that ability to do so is founded on a strong defense capability that provides the foundation for it to conduct its international diplomacy on the same world stage as everybody else, and provides the kind of social stability domestically that allows for harmony across races, religions, different ethnic groups, that diversity to thrive. Of course, at that point in time, you will recognize, and for those of you who go back in history, you will also know that there were difficulties with Indonesia. There was the confrontasi in Indonesia, because the Indonesians were not pleased with the idea that the Malaysians and the Singaporeans were coming together. So there were bombs that went off in Singapore at the time, in the early 1970s, late 60s, and this was yet another, and continues to be, the kind of Southeast Asian security landscape that Singapore continues to have to contend with. Now, if you overlay on top of these traditional security challenges to the transnational terrorism threat that is being faced in much of the world, and no different in various parts of Southeast Asia, given the fact that the Southeast Asia is an expanse, an archipelago of islands, and many of them are havens for terrorist camps to possibly sprout. And we do know of terrorist groups that make their training bases in some parts of Southeast Asia. This is an ongoing challenge and threat that confronts the military in Singapore. And so to do that, we engage with as many partners, friends. Our strategy for defense in Singapore is built on deterrence, building up as strong a capability as possible with the budget that we have available, made available by the government, and diplomacy. And these twin pillars, and diplomacy meaning we make as many friends, being a small country, we make as many friends as we can, and we do train in almost every in many countries. I think we have training facilities and arrangements with many countries in the world, and I can just cite in France, we have an Air Force training base in Cazaux. We have training in New Zealand, in Australia, in Brunei, in Thailand, in Taiwan. We have fighter jets training out of the United States. We do submarine training in Sweden. I can go on. It's a long list, but it is an ability or a willingness to really reach outside of the physical constraints that we face in Singapore to try and make as many friends as possible, because we recognize that security, stability internationally and in the region is fundamental to Singapore's continued economic growth and development. Because anything that happens in terms of security and instability in the region will clearly have a knock-on effect in Singapore. Yeah, thanks. I think this idea of private life, family life, this idea of work, finding the right work-life balance, I don't think this is quite what Professor Pavi meant when he talked about work in life and life in work. But I like to look at this idea, this question that you have about how do you balance your public life, your work life with your family life. And I think it's all about priorities and choices. Work never ends, and if you continue to put all that energy into work at the expense of family, you'll find at the end of the day, when you look back at all the transient nature of work, that you would have lost what in many people's minds is the most important ingredient that keeps you happy and grounded, which is your family. And so my attitude is, when we think about a work-life balance, is you really just want to put a lot more work into your life, and you want to put a little bit more life into your work. And if you can do that, you would find the right balance point. Unfortunately, in my current job in SMRT, what is private and what is public is not so easy to discern, especially in the social media. And everywhere you go, everybody recognizes me as the guy who is supposed to repair and renew trains in Singapore. Happily, I haven't been abused when I take the train, and people haven't thrown stones at me for disruptions. And we just had a disruption, actually, a minor disruption on Saturday evening because of a power trip in the northern part of Singapore. But I would tell you that very often, whether you're in business, whether you're in government, and wherever you might be, it is really the family support, the support of your loved ones, the ones who truly care about you, that you will draw strength and inspiration from as you take on adversity, difficulties, challenges, and crises at work. And it is important, as I've said, to find that right balance and not consume yourself or have yourself completely indulgent at work. There was I tell you a story of the way in which public life and private life plays out. I was on the train on National Day, and on National Day, on the 9th of August this year, we gave out free travel to all commuters. It was our way of celebrating the 50th birthday of Singapore, and so the company decided that it would spend millions of dollars giving away free travel to anyone who wants to take our bus and train services. And and of course, there was a lot of appreciation all around, even though it was twice the number of ridership that we were experiencing that day, because everybody was coming out to celebrate. So I was going home at the end of the day, and I saw three men blocking, well, they were standing at the doorway of the train, and I saw them looking at me. I was standing at the other end of the train, and I thought, okay, well, this is a group of people who clearly recognize me, because they were stealing sly glances across, and they were whispering to themselves, and I thought, well, this is obviously a group of people who recognize me. And so when I reached my station and I wanted to get off, so I was squeezing my way to the front, when one of them put his hand out in front of me. And my natural reaction, of course, I was thinking, who is this bunch of four-letter words trying to block my way? But actually what he was trying to do was he stuck his hand out to shake my hand, and the very next thing that he said was, "Mr. Kuek, thank you very much for the free travel you gave today." Now, in many ways, that's an example of the kind of public-private life. In many ways, there's no way to divide private from public. And my advice to all of you is to always find, as much as you can, that private space, and keep yourself grounded, humble, attuned to whatever it is that's most important to you in your relationships. And not let the rest of the world, no matter how difficult, and sometimes social media can be very ugly, very, very uncompromising and unfair in their remarks and criticisms, and often not even very well founded and justified, but to keep yourself balanced with the relationships that matter the most to you. And for me, obviously, that's my family. I think that when you set out, and I think this idea of imagination, innovation, it's actually this attitude of daring to dream, being willing to step outside of the box in order to break new ground, if you like, break the frontiers of what's been tried before. That requires that imagination. It also requires courage, a willingness to try and to fail if it must be. Now, if you stay on the tried and tested, then you will only ever do what you've always ever done, or what other people have always done, and you wouldn't have been able to break out and try to make a difference in your own way. And I have to say that whether it was transforming the armed forces, and we were taking information technology, we were looking at a generational change from a generation X, Y, to the net gen, if you like, the people, the millennials who have grown up only knowing an information age. And when we were shifting the military from the industrial age, if you like, to the information age, it's a huge transformation. Everything changes. It's not just structures that change. We can't be as hierarchical in our work structures as we were before. And you know how hierarchical the military can be, as with any other big corporate body, hugely hierarchical. But when you're talking about information and communication technologies, you have to be much flatter, you have to be much more networked, and you have to recognize that that changes the way in which decisions and information flows. And I like to think that while decision-making still has to be largely hierarchical in nature, information flow has to be non-hierarchical in order for businesses to thrive and in order for you to be able to lead an organization effectively. And that imagination, that innovation comes about from understanding that technology is there for you to revisit, review, change everything that is status quo. Some people like to describe it as thinking again, thinking across, and thinking ahead. And if you can think about it in this way and challenge everything that you are confronted with the idea that everything that is before you, any rule, standard, practice, or process that you are faced with, if you think again about why must you do it this way, isn't there a better way to do it? If you are thinking ahead in terms of trying to understand what's the future, and what does the future mean to me in the present? And can I join the dots between the present and the future in a meaningful way, even if it is disruptive? Will that allow me a better, more meaningful way to do what it is that I'm required to do? And this idea, of course, of thinking across is where lateral thinking across boundaries, and you've got a theme today about transdisciplinarity, and that's exactly the idea that you want to find innovation. You've got to imagine what it is like to think across, think ahead into the future, and think again in terms of challenging fundamentals, sacred cows, institutions, and legacies, which may have been very correct and relevant a year ago, 10 years ago, a generation ago, but no longer is as relevant or as meaningful today. And that, I think, is my way of suggesting that that's how you apply your imagination in a structured way, in the way in which you think ahead, across, again. Some challenges. Let me just give you an example of the strike that I talked about in SMRT. I know, like I say, you may be more familiar to strikes than we are in Singapore. And certainly the Chinese bus drivers who went on strike are certainly more familiar with strikes, because in China, striking is quite a common thing for workers to do. But not in Singapore. And of course, this was 1.5 months into my job, and I suddenly was confronted with this issue that had never been briefed to me as part of the starting brief for the new CEO, that there were these underlying issues with regards to work and life, working and living conditions. But I went down to investigate a little bit more about why it is that they were unhappy. And it turned out that actually the real reason for that unhappiness is a cultural one. It's cultural sensitivity. And I raise this as an example of people management because we're all more than likely going to be working in an organization that has got multiple cultures in the workplace. And even a company that does design in one part of France, it does its manufacturing in another part of the world, it's got engineers and designers and it's got marketeers from all parts of the world all working together. The real issue in working in the organizations of today and into the future is we're working in a globalized community where cultural sensitivity isn't something that you can presume. And that's not even about language. It's about taboos, traditions, customs, sensitivities to words. And this is exactly the problem that we face with the Chinese bus drivers. And you know, there is a big majority of Chinese in Singapore, and yet we could not understand that Chinese Singaporeans and mainland Chinese have got different cultural sensitivities. We had a HR, it was such a routine thing, you know. At the end of the year, there is a bonus that is paid out. And so the Human Resource Department wrote a directive that was posted online and also was pasted on the bulletin boards that said that all workers will enjoy their year-end incentives amounting to however many months. And in parentheses, in brackets, it says, except the Chinese bus drivers. It was a factual thing because the Chinese bus drivers were on contract. They were not on permanent service. And so contract workers had their own incentives. So it was stating a factual thing, but it went down very, very badly. And it was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back because we had no idea that deep in their psyche, this reminded them of the days where they were discriminated, prejudiced, abused by the Japanese who had invaded China. And this idea that everybody is one class, but you are not because you are bracketed out and you are excluded, went deep into the sensitivity of the Chinese workers. And for that, they went on strike. And the rest of it, work conditions, living conditions, was only in many ways just the excuse. But it was this sense that they were being affronted, offended culturally. That was the reason they went on strike. And I talk about cultural sensitivity in terms of, I'd give you this same example, because when I went out, and of course they made all their demands, they wanted A to Z, all the things that they demanded from management, in order for them to be persuaded to come back to work. My attitude, of course, having been in the military, is I don't negotiate under threat. Right? This is like dealing with terrorists, right? You don't negotiate with a terrorist. So my attitude was, the answer is no to everything. But if you come to talk to me after you come back to work, we can sit down and we can talk about everything from A to Z. But until such time that you recognize that this is illegal and this is not the way you conduct discussions and negotiations, the answer is no. So I promised to come back, and I had my entire set of lines that I wanted to convey to all 100 over of them at a town hall session such as like this. And I decided that I would speak to them not in English, but in Chinese. Now, my Chinese is not really very good. It's only a little bit better than my French. And I had it translated for me, word for word, in the phonetics. And I practiced it It was a 45-minute speech. It was the most difficult speech I had ever made in my life because I had to speak it in Mandarin. I was so worried that they wouldn't even understand my intonation. I had it put on a slide so that they could follow what I'm saying as I'm speaking. I think it must have been just as painful for them to listen as it was for me to speak it. But at the end of that speech, and bear in mind that everything that I was saying was no in Chinese, the very first person who was the ringleader in the strike put up his hand and said he would like to speak. And so I said, yes, please. His very first statement was, Mr. CEO, I appreciate very much the effort that you put into speaking in our language. For that alone, we accept all your answers that it is no. And that was the end of that discussion with the strikers. I raise this point because it's about communication. It's about dealing with sensitivities and engaging with your audience, whoever that might be. They could be workers in the factory. They could be your customers, whoever it might be. People management, the skill sets and the willingness for you to reach out and to engage on terms and at the level that is their level, not your level, is key. And I think that's an example which I share with you to show that cultural sensitivity or insensitivity, if you like, or obtuseness, cuts both ways. And it's something which in business, in leadership, or wherever we might choose to be, it's an important thing for us to work on as we learn how to live in a much more global village, if you like, that we're seeing today. The next question. I don't think, in the army, in the civil service, in the corporate world, I think leadership challenges, management challenges are not different. I can find more things in common than I can find differences. Yes, differences from the point of view of your audience is different. Your followers, their upbringing, their history, their walks of life, they come from different places. But the core motivations of all human beings are the same. In the corporate world, there may be shareholders. In the military, there may be other stakeholders. The soldiers in our system in Singapore, they're conscript soldiers. So there are parents to work with. There are employers whom we have to work with because they have to come for their reservist service. But I have to say, if you like, that all things considered, I don't think there is a meaningful difference that you would say applies wherever it is that you might work. There may be local differences. If you're working in a startup, small, 10 people, it's different from working in a giant conglomerate where there are 10,000 people. The cultures are different, the work attitudes, the value system, the agility, the camaraderie, all may be different, but the basic instincts of leadership and management, whether you're in a team of 3 or in a team of 30, are the same. And the same 10 points that I have advocated are the same 10 points that I continue to challenge myself by, despite having come through on so many pinnacle appointments through different domains. How did I succeed through my first month of bad luck? Well, I won't say I've succeeded yet. It continues to be an ongoing challenge, but back to this idea that you have to work with the stakeholders. And in SMRT, and I think in your own experience, or maybe you will find going forward, every stakeholder has a point of view. These points of views cannot be marginalized just because there is another stakeholder that has a different point of view. So in SMRT, as an example, we have shareholders. So I have 50 over 1,000 retail shareholders, one of the largest number of retail shareholders in the Singapore Stock Exchange. Many of them are retirees. They invest some money into the company with a view to earning some dividend that will supplement their retirement income. Of course, they want to see profit and dividends paid out at the end of the year. Unfortunately, that same group of people who are asking for dividends and high profits is confronted with commuters, public commuters who are paying transport fares, who don't want the company to be making a profit because that profit is coming, or so they seem to think, coming from fares. The truth of it, of course, is it's not. It's not really coming from fares. It's actually coming from the commercial business that we run, the shops, the leasing of property that takes place. If you go to some of our MRT stations, you will see, much like in Paris actually, that a lot of the advertising that is done, I think in France a lot of it is done by JC Decor. In Singapore, we do it. And we do the advertising. We have retail spaces that we rent out to shops, office spaces, and the income that's there comes into the earnings stream of the company. But you have, well, I had to very early on work with each one of these groups. Most importantly, of course, is to work with commuters to explain to them that this aging profile of the MRT system requires patience and understanding and support on their part. And even as they put up with minor disruptions along the way, there is an entire renewal and replacement work that is ongoing in Singapore. And in a year or two, we will completely revitalize and renew the entire MRT system on our oldest lines, on the north-south and the east-west lines, and it will be as good as new again. And with that vision of a future that will be better, it was easier for me to be able to explain why some of the current inconveniences have to be shouldered, stomached if you like, so that we can all see a better day in reliability. And I have to say, part of that reversal of public mood, and our public satisfaction has gone up again. People are happier now. Still, there will be detractors, but people are happier with the MRT system than they have been. And it is because they can see that there have been improvements that have been made in service, in reliability, in the quality, and in availability as far as congestion goes. And today we have managed to reverse the aging performance of our train system. Our best performance was in 2006, 2007, in terms of the number of delays lasting more than 5 minutes, as this is the statistic that all metros around the world capture. We do that as well. And so for every 100,000 kilometers of travel, we have about 0.7 incidents lasting longer than 5 minutes. Now that's not bad. That's really not bad. That puts us as among the top 10 in the world and brings us back to the level that it was in 2006, 10 years ago. Well, we're not stopping here. We're actually trying to bring it down to 0.5, 0.3 over time. And that actually, if you like, one incident lasting more than 5-minute delay. You think about it. We travel every day, our train system, and I think it's not very different in Paris or in most other major cities. We travel nearly 2 times around the equator. All our trains cumulatively running every day, if you add up the distance that it's traveling, we're traveling nearly twice around the equator every single day. To be able to do that and not have a delay lasting more than 5 minutes is quite a phenomenal task by the engineers and the technicians. But that's the kind of exacting standard that is required for any self-respecting operator in the world, and that's what we're determined to try to do. So, in many ways, I would not say we have reached success, but I would say we're on the right track to winning back the hearts and minds and the public confidence in our service and in our quality.
Maybe just answer one last question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you talk about your physical exercise or if you want to talk about because the question about physical exercise is important. And so you can select the question that you want.
Sure. Well, I do have a daily routine. Naturally, I try and start the day with some exercise. I wake up fairly early. I still drop my children off in school at the beginning of the day. That makes me have to wake up very early because their day starts at 7:30 in the morning. And although I don't have to get into the office until maybe 9, so I have that 1.5 hours where I will do my physical exercise, either in the gym or I go for a swim or I run around Marina Bay because my office is right by the city, at City Hall. And so I come to the office and I step out and I run around Marina Bay, which if you have a chance, it's a nice run. It's a very pleasant run, and I might bump into you if you're running around there. And then what I do is, of course, I start the day by trying to have a little bit of quieter time before my meetings start. Because once the meetings start, it doesn't stop all the way until late evening. So in order to set the goals, reflect a little bit about the macros, if you like, and not get consumed in the firefighting for every day, it's to start the day with a little bit of thinking, planning, organizing, prioritizing what it is that I want to do for that day, or if I'm looking at it as a continuum over through to the rest of the week, is to try to organize that time. So my secretary tries to keep it as protected time. It doesn't always work, but largely it is protected time for that first half an hour of the day before I launch into all kinds of work activities. And I try to balance, if I can, meetings with actually getting out of the office to try and meet people in the trains, in the stations, the bus interchanges, walking the ground, trying to see what people are doing, the mechanics, the technicians. And basically, it's to try and see whether or not I can get a feel for what's going on the ground, rather than only rely on management reports and what it is that my direct subordinates will want to tell me, which is often a much rosier picture than what is really happening on the ground. And then, of course, I try to finish the day at a decent hour. It doesn't always work, but I find it important and a matter of personal discipline that I don't drag meetings on just because people like to talk about all kinds of things without a purposeful agenda. And I try to organize the meetings so that people can get back to doing work. And people can get back in time to at least have dinner, no matter how late it might be, with their families. So it's an important priority for me, because if I don't, and if I just simply soak up everybody's time, it simply cascades down, and the last person out there in the chain will have even less time than I started out allowing. And that's a personal discipline that I have tried to keep for every one of my appointments across, as I've said, of course, where duty calls, none of this is possible. But where it is a routine day, I try to end it at a decent hour so that people can get home to their families. I bring the work home, and people have told me it's not a good thing. Don't bring your work home, because then your mind is still at work even though you're at home. But it's better for me, and I've found it has worked better for me to take all my work home, set it aside, have a couple of hours with my wife and children, and they go to bed early, and I continue to work after they've gone to bed, if it is necessary to do so. And in answering that question at the beginning about, therefore, the work-life balance, and how do you strike that balance between work and life, and how do you find that space between private and public, or official and personal. It's really about making these choices. It's about optimizing, prioritizing, and deciding each step of the way what it is that you put your emphasis on. And early on in my speech, I had made a statement that at the end of the day, what you are, what you have become, whether it's today or in the future, is a function of all of those decisions and choices that you choose to make at that point in time. And nobody looks 20 years from today to say, if I did this today, I'm going to get to where I am in 20 years' time. It's too long a time horizon with so many variables that you can't predict. But if you can say today, if I have decided that I'm not going to smoke, if I've decided that I'm going to run, if I've decided that I'm not going to get drunk again, if I've decided that whatever it might be that you've decided, every single step, every single decision that you're making, seemingly small, routine, unimportant, you may think, adds itself up towards whether or not that compass course, that navigation course where your compass is set even 1 degree or 1 mile out, leads you to a completely different place from where you started with simply that minor deviation in the direction that you choose to set for yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.